Thank you. Welcome everyone to our public review session this afternoon. My name is Jerry Bogaz. I'm an assistant director with the staff of the New York Metropolitan Transportation Council, and I'd like to welcome you all to this session. We are in the middle of a public comment period for the draft of Nymtic's next plan, which is titled Moving Forward. There are six public review sessions that are spread out over 3 days: today, next week on July 14th, and then finally a week after that on July 22nd. The sessions are scheduled on all those days at noon and at 7 p.m. So this is the first of these 6 sessions. We'll be using an interactive platform in this session to collect comments from you, but we'll also be sharing a lot of information about the plan. There's a lot of information to be shared. This will give you a flavor of what the plan is all about and what its role is. And if you wanted, there's still additional time if you wanted to go more deeply into any part of the plan and submit comments. The comment period is open through July 27th. I do want to acknowledge Jan Kahn, who is on the line, who was our regional planning manager, who did the lion's share of the coordinating and the work with our member agencies to put this plan together, along with his staff. Thank you to them for the work that they've done over the past 2 years, actually, to get this plan together. So with that as a bit of introduction, I would like to ask Jessica to advance the next slide. And Jessica Ortiz, my colleague, will be giving you some information about how to use the platform we'll be using today, and then we'll get into the session. Jessica?
Thanks, Jerry. Hi, everyone. I will be the second voice you will hear today throughout the presentation. I'm going to start by walking you through the platform that we're using today. It's the Webex Platform. If you're accessing the meeting from your computer screen, what you'll see here on the slide will look very similar. Locations of the controls may be different depending on the device you are using, and the 2 buttons at the bottom that I will walk through are very important to note. This first button is a mute button. As you've already noticed, you've been placed on mute. You will remain on mute throughout the entirety of the presentation. The second button is the comment button. The purpose of today is to provide you with comments, provide you with an overview of Plan 2050. We are recording comments using the chat button. You can select that chat button at the bottom of the screen and type your comments in the message window. These comments will be addressed in the final plan. We will also be using Poll Everywhere software to collect your comments throughout the presentation. We have placed question prompts throughout the presentation to collect your comments, and to respond to these questions and prompts, we will go to pollev.com/Nymtic. We have placed a link in the chat window. Now let's give Poll Everywhere a try. Our first question will ask you where you all are participating from. You will notice on your screen there's a map, and you can just select where on the map you're participating from. So that could be from Putnam County, Westchester County, Rockland County, the 5 boroughs of New York City, Nassau County, and Suffolk County. So I'll give you all a moment to place a pin on where you are participating from. And I see somebody's placed a pin on the Suffolk County. I've seen another pin on Manhattan. And I'll give just a few more moments for anybody who would like to place a pin and identify where they are participating from today. Okay. So next question is just prompting you to ask how you heard about these public review sessions. We reached out to the public in a number of ways. We had meetings by email. We had a meeting notice by email. We had a meeting notice by mail. We released our Nymtic Notes newsletter that comes out quarterly. We had a media release to local papers throughout the Nymtic region. We did some social media posts through Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. Word of mouth could have also been a way to contact to hear about the meeting and for people to communicate about the meeting. And then we acknowledge that there are other ways for people to get information. So please let us know how you heard about these public review sessions. Great. I see some people have heard about the meeting through email. Others have heard about the meetings through Nymtic Notes, and some have heard through word of mouth. It's great to hear that people are talking about the regional transportation plan. So I'll just give it a few more seconds. Great, thank you for your input. And as I mentioned, throughout the presentation, we will continue to prompt you all for questions, and please feel free to participate. And as a reminder, if you do not see the question on your web browser, I would suggest that you refresh, and then that most recent question will pop up. So hand it back to, oh, no, so I'll go over the ground rules. As I mentioned, you will all be muted throughout the presentation. We will go through the Poll Everywhere platform, and that'll be used to gather input from you all. And we'll also have the chat window to record any comments, and those comments and the comments we collect through Poll Everywhere will be responded to in the plan document. And we will be recording this workshop for anybody who was not able to attend. So now I will hand it back to Jerry.
Thanks, Jessica. Great. So we got through those initial exercises, so you get a sense of how to use the Poll Everywhere software. Let's get into an introduction of the plan and where it fits in the overall process and what its impact is on the region. So first of all, in terms of these public review sessions, we are providing information about the plan and the related congestion management process, both of which are federal requirements. We're trying also to direct the participants in these sessions to additional information and documentation if you want to dig a little deeper and comment later on in the comment period. Again, the comment period is open through July 27th, so this is not your only opportunity to comment. We will be collecting public commentary for formal response in the final plan document in these sessions, and I want to underscore that since this is a formal comment period, whatever comments we receive in these review sessions will need to be responded to directly and placed in the final document. And finally, we'll be directing participants to avenues for further commentary during the comment period, again through July 27th. Next slide, please. So we do want to give you an overview of Nymtic and the planning process so you can understand how this all fits together. We do have a link to a quick video that we wanted to show you. So Jessica, I think you need to take it to the video.
Welcome to Nymtic, the New York Metropolitan Transportation Council. Established in 1982, Nymtic is the metropolitan planning organization for New York City, Long Island, and the lower Hudson Valley. Our 10-county region includes the 5 boroughs of New York City, plus Nassau, Suffolk, Westchester, Putnam, and Rockland counties, and is home to more than 12 million people. Nymtic's principals include 9 voting members and 7 advisory members, comprised of 5 suburban county executives, 2 New York City commissioners, the New York State Transportation Commissioner, and the chief executive of the Metropolitan Transportation Authority. Advisory members include the New York State Commissioner of Environmental Conservation, the chief executives of the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey Transit, and the North Jersey Transportation Planning Authority, and the local administrators of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the Federal Highway Administration, and the Federal Transit Administration. Federal legislation requires that metropolitan regions must have a Metropolitan Planning Organization, or MPO, to plan for and make decisions on the use of federal transportation funding. Approximately $10 to $15 billion of federal funding comes into the region during each 5-year funding period. Nymtic ensures that existing and future spending for transportation projects and programs is based on a cooperative, comprehensive, and continuing planning process. The elected and appointed officials who comprise Nymtic have a shared vision, recognizing that mobility, the ability of people and goods to move easily and safely to, from, and between locations, is crucial to the lives of everyone who resides in, works in, or visits within the Nymtic planning region. Therefore, Therefore, we aspire to ensure that the mobility provided reaches everyone in a sustainable, healthy, and equitable manner, to invest efficiently for these transportation needs, and to respond effectively to the transportation challenges of tomorrow. Moving forward is the next long-range regional transportation plan for the Nymtic region. Updated every 4 years, the Regional Transportation Plan is a blueprint that helps identify the transportation needs in Nymtic's planning area in order to guide the use of federal funding. Nymtic's plan covers all modes of surface transportation, including highways, roads and bridges, streets, rail and bus transit, bicycle and pedestrian facilities, as well as freight and special needs transportation. Our region is facing difficult challenges. Despite that, looking to the future is as important as ever for the region's long-term vitality. Moving Forward proposes a regional vision that is built around 5 strategic goals. To provide a transportation system that ensures the safety and security of people and goods across all transportation uses and modes. To provide a transportation system that is maintained, operated, and coordinated to better enable reliable, easy, accessible, and seamless travel across the region. To provide a transportation system that efficiently serves today's population and plans for the growing number of residents, workers, and increasing amount of goods. To provide a transportation system that minimizes its impact on the environment, especially the effects of climate change. And to provide a transportation system that is resilient and can mitigate, adapt to, and respond to chronic and acute stresses and disruptions. As Nymtic pursues these goals through our regional transportation planning process, the following guiding principles inform our planning. We will consider the needs of all users across Nymtic's planning area as a whole in the planning process. We will make the best use of federal resources for the regional transportation system and increase them where practical, while leveraging local resources as efficiently and effectively as possible. We will monitor the performance of the regional transportation system as a means of prioritizing improvements and investments. We will support multi-agency approaches that enhance the integration of independently operated components of the regional transportation system. We will engage the public and community stakeholders. And we will harness technological advancements to improve our transportation system. People living in the Nymtic region are very aware of how their transportation system works and where it needs improvement. What transportation improvements are important to you? What matters most to your community? Your input is critical as we continue planning for our region's transportation needs. So how can you get involved? Attend a public workshop, or provide your thoughts through our website or social media channels. Visit our website to join our mailing list, register for a workshop, and more. So get involved. Together, we can keep our region moving forward.
Okay. Jessica, as long as we're back to the slides, that's an overview of what this thing called Nymtic is and how the planning process works to bring federal dollars into our region. I want to go to the next slide and talk a little bit about how the plan fits into the overall process. So there are numerous steps in the process. All of these are required by federal regulation in order for us to remain eligible for federal funding. So in many ways, the Regional Transportation Plan, which defines long-range needs, right at the top of this chart, is in fact the foundation piece to the entire process. There are federal planning dollars that come into our region through the Unified Planning Work Program, and also the members place planning resources into the mix, and that all helps to define what the improvements will need to be going forward. And then as we turn the corner, we reach the Transportation Improvement Program. So this is a detailed 5-year program of transportation improvements that will be eligible for federal funding. It's essentially the first 5 years of the Regional Transportation Plan. And that defines the schedule and funding for specific improvement projects. We do have to perform 2 analyses on our process. one for congestion management, the other for regional emissions. Those are required under the federal regulations and under the Clean Air Act amendments of 1990. And they analyze the impacts of the plan and program that our members put together. And finally, as we turn the left corner, we get to project planning and implementation. So this is the reason for this whole process, is to bring our members to consensus on what the improvements are, be they roadway improvements, improvements to rail lines, purchase of transit vehicles, whatever the improvements are. We need to get to the point where we can actually implement those improvements. That's the reason for the process. So that's a little bit of an overview of the overall metropolitan transportation planning process. Next slide, please. So the plan, as was stated in the video, it's a federally required product. It defines the region's long-term needs for transportation and also the long-term desires over a minimum 20-year time frame. This particular plan that we're talking about today is through the year 2050, so that is longer than the minimum time frame. It needs to be updated every 4 years by regulation, and it's a blueprint that helps guide federal funding of investments in our planning area. And it's developed collaboratively amongst our member agencies, but also we are charged with bringing other stakeholders and the interested public into that process. Next slide, please. It covers all modes of surface transportation, and that includes highway, streets, public transportation, non-motorized such as bicycle and pedestrian, goods movement, and human services transportation. In addition, it addresses key activities such as operations and management of the transportation system, safety, security, and regional finances. Next slide, please. We did do a major session or series of sessions of public outreach last year to help put together the draft plan that we're reviewing in this comment period now. And because of the fact that this was during a pandemic year, we did have to convert our outreach efforts to virtual outreach efforts, and did so in a number of ways. Very successfully. We talked to over 4,000 or heard from over 4,000 individual people in these efforts. You can see that the program was varied. It included online regional workshops, an online engagement platform that was up and running for 3 months, online focus groups with specific groups such as residents of communities of concern and users of specialized transportation services. We utilized social media advertising, working with local partner organizations, and there was a pollfish survey of 1,000 respondents that was done also at the end of this outreach period. So that outreach and the information we gathered was all considered in the development of the draft plan that you're going to be seeing shortly. Next slide, please. So I want to start with the plan's context, which is defining future needs. This is a key foundation of the plan, and it's defining likely futures in terms of population, employment, and travel. And so it really provides an overarching context for the plans and improvements that are contained in the plan. If we go to the next slide. So these future needs are defined first by forecasting socioeconomic and demographic variables. So these forecasts include population, employment, labor force, and the number of households in the region. And these metrics are forecasted in 5-year intervals to the plan's horizon year. Next slide. The geography of the forecast is more than the 10-county Nymtic planning area. The forecasts are undertaken for 31 counties in a multi-state metropolitan region, which includes New York City, and consists of 5 subregions: the city itself, Long Island, the Lower and Mid Hudson Valley, Northern New Jersey, and Southwestern Connecticut. Next slide. Now, these forecasts, of course, are long-term, and the COVID-19 pandemic has disrupted in the short term the SED trends that we've been monitoring for years. Now, adjustments have been made to the forecast to reflect this short-term impact and the resulting economic uncertainty, but the primary purpose of the forecast is a long-term outlook, which is less susceptible to short-term volatility. So although there's an attempt to account for the short-term impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, the long-term forecasts are what really is the objective here for the plan. Next slide. So we're going to give you a sense of some of the overall SED forecasts. Jessica, if you could go to that link. So we're going to be moving to our web portal and starting with population. Actually, no, why don't we put on, yes, so in 2017, this is the base year for these forecasts, just over almost 13 million people in the Nymtic planning area, just over 7 million jobs in the employment, 6.5 million people in the civilian labor force, and the average household size was 2.75 people per household. These are key variables in terms of defining travel. The 2050 forecasts indicate significant growth in our region is anticipated, just over 14 million in population, just over 8 million jobs, a labor force of 7.22 million, and a dropping household size down to 2.71. So the difference between 2017 and 2050, if you could click that box, Jessica, is a 10.23% increase in population, almost 14% in employment, just about 11% in civilian labor force, and a dropping average household size. Jessica, if we go back to the slides, please. So these are used in our methodology to produce forecasts of travel in the Nymtic planning area through the horizon year. So you can see here a simple graphic that shows some of the key forecasts. Daily trips increasing by almost 10%, auto trips by about 8%, transit trips by 12%, daily vehicle miles of travel by about 10%, and daily vehicle hours of travel by almost 13%. So we're looking at significant growth in the future. And of course, as everyone knows, there is significant congestion on our systems now. And growth in travel in the future will present a challenge, and it's that challenge that at least the plan is part of the plan is responding to. Next slide, please. We also have freight flows in our region that add to the demands for transportation capacity. These are some numbers from the Transearch database looking at forecasts through 2045. We do see significant increases in inbound goods movement into the Nymtic counties, as well as outbound and movement within. Our particular planning area is not only a destination for goods and a generator of goods, it's also a corridor through which goods travel, and goods also move around in the planning area. So there's a lot of demand given goods movement, and as we'll see in a little bit, the COVID-19 pandemic is certainly playing, in the short term at least, is playing a role in changing what those patterns are for goods movement. Next slide. When we're looking at these forecasts, we do have to look at transformative change and drivers and disruptors. So these are larger structural developments that have the potential for transformation of how transportation happens. But many of them are not really quantifiable at this point. These are qualitative judgments we're taking into account in this section of the plan. Whereas the future forecasts are based on quantitative variables, these are more qualitative. So you can see some of the transformative change that we cover in the plan. Obviously the pandemic in the short term, transformative change in personal mobility and the evolution of shared mobility. Looking at the pace of technological developments that could change the way transportation is provided, e-commerce and distribution innovations on the goods side, and of course distributed manufacturing, also known as 3D printing, could play a significant role in the future in terms of where goods are produced and how they're moved. Next slide, please. We're also looking at some large-scale disruptors in the plan, which could change forecasts in the future. Climate change and extreme weather events certainly are among those disruptors, but we also have the transformation of the energy system away from fossil fuels to various forms of electrical transportation, changing demographics and lifestyle, work style expectations. Those particular disruptors are being altered themselves by the pressures brought on by the pandemic and changing land use patterns and where people can live, can settle, and can work. These are all potential disruptors in the future that could affect these forecasts that we've laid out in the plan. Next slide. So the plan does assume a qualitative impact of transformative change. So it's likely that these impacts on the plan's forecasts will be somewhat muted during the first 10 years of the plan. So the changes that we're looking at, although they are mounting, the judgment is that in the first 10 years, the forecasts in the plan will likely be will likely hold and carry forth, and then the second, after the 10-year period, the second part of the plan outward through the 2050 horizon year, the impacts of these changes on transportation demand and supply become increasingly uncertain, and it's not possible at this time to reasonably forecast when and how these drivers of change will mature, but they will likely happen beyond the first 10 years of the plan. So these are the judgments that the plan is making in terms of transformative change. Next slide. So now we're going to go into our first interactive exercise, and I'll turn it back over to Jessica.
Great, thank you everyone. So we wanted to gather a few comments on these last slides that Jerry shared. And the first question that we're asking is if we have any comments on the scale of the growth forecast. So the type of question that this is you can send in a sentence or a string of words to represent your thoughts, and we will see them here on the screen, and I'll read them as they come in. So I just wanted to give everyone a couple seconds to provide their comments on the scale of the growth forecast. And seeing no comments come in, I'm going to go to the next set of questions. Here we're asking for comments on the adjustments that we made for COVID-19. Again, this is the type of question where you can send in a sentence and we can read it out loud. We'll all see it as they come in. So I'll give you all a couple of seconds to provide any comments you may have on the adjustments for COVID-19. And I see that somebody has said that they liked our approach. Most of the impacts are short-term, and a little bit of the impacts are on long-term forecasts. Thank you for that comment. And so we'll move on to the next interactive question. This asks on any comments on the consideration of transformative change. Again, this is the type of question where you can send in a sentence or any thought you may have on the considerations that we made towards a transformative change. So I'll give that a couple of seconds for responses to come in. And seeing none, I'm going to go to the next slide, and I'll hand it back to Jerry. Thank
right.
you.
So as you know, as you've been thinking about those prompts, if you didn't enter something or you think of something to enter later on, there's always the chat bot. So please don't think that you're limited to the prompts. That's your first opportunity. Any of those topics that you wanted to comment on and you weren't able to get into the prompts, just put them in the chat pod and we will record them. So now we're going to get on to what is essentially the guts of the plan, which is what we plan to do based on the plan's context. So this is hopefully going to provide you a flavor of the strategic component of the new plan. There's a lot of information here. We can't cover all the points, certainly in this session. We can point you in the direction of anything that you're interested in if you wanted to do a greater exploration, but we will be asking you for some top of mind thoughts and comments about what we're going to be presenting. There are, as we said at the outset, 5 strategic goals, and we're going to start to cover them beginning with the shared vision. Next slide, Jessica. So in this plan, our member agencies have proposed a shared vision for regional mobility. And this excerpt really captures the spirit of it. So the elected and appointed officials who comprise Nymtic recognize that mobility, the ability of people and goods to move easily and safely to, from, and between locations, is crucial to the lives of everyone who resides in, works in, or visits within the Nymtic planning region. And therefore, the member agencies of Nymtic aspire to ensure that the mobility provided reaches everyone in a sustainable, healthy, and equitable manner, aspire to invest efficiently for these transportation needs, and aspire to respond effectively to the transportation challenges of tomorrow. So that's sort of the overarching preamble to the shared vision. The vision, no, that's okay, Jessica, keep going. The vision then posits 5 goals in the areas of safety and security, reliable and easy travel, planning for changing demand, reducing environmental impacts, and resiliency. You heard about those goals in the video. The goal statements, which we won't go through again, are that we envision, and then a transportation system that ensures safety and security. We envision a transportation system that is maintained, operated, and coordinated. We envision a transportation system that efficiently serves today's population and plans for growing number of residents, workers, and increasing amount of goods. So in each of those categories, you can see what the goal statements are here. We envision a transportation system that minimizes its greenhouse gas emissions, and a transportation system that is resilient. Those are the 5 strategic goal areas that our members have identified. Next slide. They've also indicated 6 guiding principles, as you heard earlier, that is part of the shared vision. So in fact, these principles operate throughout the 5 goal areas. Considering the needs of all users, making the best use of federal resources, monitoring performance, supporting multi-agency approaches, engaging the public, and harnessing technological advancements. So those guiding principles are an important part of the shared vision also. Back to Jessica for the next prompt.
Great, thank you, Jerry. So as Jerry mentioned, we have 5 vision goals, and we wanted to ask you to please rank them in relative importance. So the way that this question works is you will see on your screen the 5 vision goals laid out: reducing environmental impacts, safety and security, planning for changing demand, resiliency, and reliable and easy travel. And what you can do is select one vision goal and sort it the way you would like. So you'd press on or select resiliency and move it up or down depending on how you rate the importance, the relative importance of that vision goal. So I see a few rankings have come in, and I see reliable and easy travel ranked as the first, safety and security ranked as the second, reducing environmental impacts ranked as the third, planning for changing demand ranked as the fourth, and resiliency ranked as the fifth. And so as more people come and share what their relative importance is to these vision goals, we'll see the rankings shift. So I see a couple more coming in, and reliable and easy travel is still ranked as the first. Oh. And I'll give it a couple seconds for...
Spoke too soon.
Oh, yeah, I know. Well, that's the good thing about live polling. We'll see how we get to see how people feel about the questions. So I'll give it a couple more seconds before trying to give a summary here. Great, so it seems like responses have stopped coming in. So we see that safety and security have been ranked as the first, reliable and easy travel has been ranked as second, reducing environmental impacts has been ranked as third, and resiliency is also a surprising third, and a fifth rank is planning for changing demand. So it's interesting to see that reducing environmental impacts and resiliency has been ranked as both as third, equally as important. So the next question. Next question is another ranking question, and it asks to rate the guiding principles in terms of relative importance. And so those 6 guiding principles have been shortened here so that you all can see them a bit better, but Jerry read them earlier in the slides, and those 6 are considering the needs of all users, best use of federal resources, monitoring performance, supporting multi-agency approaches, engaging the public, and harnessing technological advancements. So we see here that 50% of the group has, or 75% of the group considers the needs of all users is the top priority. Great, and it seems like considering the needs of all users has been considered the top priority, and the best use of federal resources has been considered tied with engaging the public, a second in relative importance. Oh. So I'll move on to the next question. And here we just have a text box question, and it asks on comments on the 5 vision goals and or the guiding principles. So again, you can add and share any additional comments that you may have on the vision goals and the 6 guiding principles. Great, and seeing no comments, I'm going to hand it back to Jerry.
Thanks, Jessica. I was just responding to something in the chat pod, actually.
Okay. Jerry, if you're speaking, you're on mute.
I'm sorry. Did you hear anything of what I just said?
No, we did not.
Okay. Well, you'd think after 16 months I wouldn't be doing that mistake, but I am. So anyway, we developed these modules around each of the 5 goals in the plan, which include a description of the vision goal itself, related objectives that were defined for the goal by our members. We then laid out recent trends, current conditions, and existing initiatives for each of the goals. And that led to recommended strategies and actions, and then finally performance metrics for each of them. So we'll go through this relatively quickly to give you a flavor. There's obviously a lot of information in all of these modules, but you'll get a sense of what the modules are. So next slide, Jessica. This is the safety and security goal, the statement is a transportation system that ensures the safety and security of people and goods across all uses and modes. Then you can see that a part of the description is the US DOT definition of safety, freedom from harm resulting from unintentional acts or circumstances, and security, freedom from intentional harm and tampering that affects both motorized and non-motorized travelers and may also include natural disasters. So those are the US DOT definitions of those 2 terms. Next slide. So here you see the objectives that were defined for this particular goal. They involve ensuring investments in existing physical assets, protect the safety of, among other things, passengers and freight systems, promoting safe streets and intersections, keeping the transportation system secure from threats, coordinating safety management, training, and education across jurisdictional boundaries, and improving the safety and security of system operations. So those are the 5 objectives that were defined for this particular goal. Next slide. So this goes back to a ranking exercise, and Jessica, back to you.
Great, thanks, Jerry. So now we'll rank the importance in order of the safety and security objectives. So as Jerry mentioned, all 5 of the safety and security objectives were listed in the prior slide. We're just asking you all to once again just rank them how you see fit in relative importance. And so I see somebody's ranked promote safe streets and intersections as number 1. A few more rankings are coming in. And I'll give it a couple more seconds. It seems like promoting safe streets and intersections is stayed at number one. Improving the safety and security of system operations has come down to has been ranked at number two, and number three is investing in existing physical assets, along with ensuring transportation system security from threats. And number five is coordinate safety management training and education. Now I'll hand it back to Jerry.
And this time I've actually unmuted. So here's just a flavor of what the recent trends, current conditions, and existing initiatives are reviewed in this particular goal module. You can see the trends in terms of fatalities and serious injuries for motor vehicles, for non-motorized motorcycles, public transportation, freight. Some of the current conditions that are described include motor vehicle crashes, pedestrian safety, micromobility, modal safety, and transportation security. And then we identify a number of existing initiatives. So this is sort of like a scan to see what's happening in the world, what has happened, what is currently happening in the world related to this particular goal. Next slide. And then to highlight one area, we did do an extra look at micromobility because it is an emerging area for safety and security, as well as an emerging modality of travel. So this term, micromobility, describes a variety of transportation devices, things like shared bicycles, shared electric scooters, and electric skateboards. Unlike cars or mopeds, these modes and modalities do not require a license or registration. They're usually these trips using these conveyances are taken as part of shared systems, often run by private operators. So therefore, rider familiarity with the conveyances may vary. The modes can approach speeds upwards of 20 miles per hour, making them too fast really to comfortably share space with pedestrians. And growth in demand has often outpaced the amount of safe infrastructure available for micromobility. So we actually, back at the end of 2019, before the pandemic hit, we did a public session, a topical session on micromobility and safety. These items that you see here came out of that discussion, that workshop with stakeholders and the interested public on what the safety implications of micromobility are. So that's a bit of a highlight of one particular area within this goal module. Next slide. Strategies and actions are recommended in the plan in these areas related to safety and security: planning and research initiatives, data collection, forecasting, and performance assessment, planning process recommendations, and program recommendations, including regional guidance programs and education and training programs. And Jessica, you're going to link now and try to show us what some of those details are. Yes, I hope. Right, so this is part of the web portal that it's both a summary of the plan and a navigation tool. And we pull down safety and security. We can see in each of these areas what some of the recommendations are. Again, this is a lot of information, and we're not going to be able to go through each of these individually, but it does show you it gives you a flavor of some of the recommendations that we're making here. Under data collection, forecasting, and performance assessment, we have one major recommendation to develop a comprehensive data collection and reporting system. Planning process recommendations include various interagency working group exercises and encouraging consideration and standards amongst Nymtic's members. And then finally, under program recommendations, we can see a number of different items in terms of regional guidance and education and training. So again, just to give you a flavor, we could easily spend half an hour on just this goal area, and clearly we don't have the time to do that. So if we could go back to the slides, Jessica. Here is a listing of the performance metrics that are recommended under this particular goal. So number of fatalities, fatality rate, serious injuries, serious injury rate, non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries, and public transportation fatalities, injuries, and safety events. So, having reviewed that particular goal module, let's go on to the next exercise. Jessica?
Great. So we wanted to ask you all to rank the safety and security of the recommended strategies and actions. As Jerry mentioned, and as we searched through the web, there are a number of kind of sub recommendations under these categories. Right now, we're just asking you to rank the categories themselves. And so we have planning and research initiatives, data collection, forecasting, and performance assessment, planning, process recommendations, and we have 2 program recommendations. They are regional guidance programs and education and training programs. So once again, please feel free to rank them as you see fit. And I will give people a couple of seconds to rank, to place their rankings in. I see the first rank has come in, planning and research initiatives and data collection, forecasting, and performance assessment has been ranked in first place. I'll give it a couple more seconds for people to place it in their rankings. And as the rankings shift, I want to remind everyone who's come in late, if you do want to participate in the interactive polling activity, please visit pollev.com/Nymtic. This is an anonymous polling activity and all of the activities will be anonymous, but we do want to get your comments on the plan. So it seems like comments have stopped coming in. Planning and research initiatives has moved up to first. Data collection, forecasting, and performance assessment has moved into second. Program recommendations, specifically regional guidance programs, has moved into third. And in fourth place, both the planning process recommendations and education and training programs have been placed in fourth. Oh. And now
Okay, let's go before it changes again.
Yeah. And so we have another kind of text wall. We're just asking you to indicate if you have any additional comments on the safety and security module. And so we'll give people a couple of seconds to see if any additional comments come in. And seeing none, I'm going to hand it back to Jerry.
Okay, great. So the next module is reliable and easy travel. You see the goal statement there. In terms of the descriptive information, we chose to highlight maximizing the service life of the existing transportation system, which you'll see when we talk about the finances is a major issue in our particular region. And ensuring the integration of various components of the transportation system is the other part of this goal that's highlighted. Next slide. The objectives, there are 8 objectives here. Rebuild, replace, and modernize assets is 1. Improving first and last mile access to transit. Providing more frequent and reliable transit service. Improving accessibility to the transportation system for users of all abilities. Investing in improving the integration of the multimodal transit network. Improving the integration of freight modes and facilities. Investing in collection and sharing of quality transportation data, and then finally promoting equitable transportation and workplace access opportunities for all populations, regardless of age, ability, race, ethnicity, or income. One thing to point out, number 5 particularly, we're talking about this on a regional basis. So clearly in New York City, the transit network, although it is multimodal, involves MTA services mostly. In the suburban areas, a little different. There are MTA services and there are also county-run bus systems. And so the integration of the multimodal transit network really takes all those different aspects of our region into account. Next slide, please. Back to you, Jessica.
Thanks, Jerry. And so now we're just going to ask you all to rank the objectives that Jerry read out loud. Again, these are kind of a truncated version of the objectives to have them all on the screen and to see the rankings that you guys place them in. So I'll give you all a couple of seconds to provide your rankings for the reliable and easy travel objectives. So it seems as if a ranking has come in, and improve accessibility to the transportation system has been ranked number 1. And I'll give it a couple more seconds. It seems as improve accessibility to the transportation system has remained at number 1. And rebuild and replace and modernize the transportation infrastructure assets has moved to number 2. I'll give it 2 or 3 more seconds before we move on to the next interactive poll. And it seems like number 3, provide more frequent and reliable transit service, has moved to number 3. Improve integration of freight modes and facilities has moved to number 4. Improve first and last mile access to transit has moved to 5th place. Invest in integration of multimodal transit network has moved to 6. And number 7 is invest in collection and sharing of transportation data.
Okay, great. Thank you again for participating in these exercises. It's very helpful and very instructive to see how your choices are in these ranking exercises. So this is a little bit of information about the trends and conditions, current risks, and existing initiatives reviewed as part of this particular goal module. And if we could go to the next slide. Just to highlight some of the major parameters, we're talking here about the federally supported transportation system, which means that all aspects of the transportation system that are eligible for federal funding. That doesn't include some components that are self-financed, particularly components like the Port Authority system. The Port Authority is considered to be a self-financed public authority. They use very little federal money. Most of their capital money comes from their own coffers because they're self-financed. So those components of the system aren't necessarily eligible for federal funding, only in special cases. If we could use the link, Jessica, we can give some statistics to show you the size of this system that we're talking about. So these are some of the major parameters in our region of the federally supported transportation system. So let's click them over. We have over 19,000 lane miles of interstates, freeways, parkways, expressways, arterial and collector roadways. We have over 2,400 roadway bridges of all types under the ownership of the state, counties, and local municipalities. Nearly 1,300 track miles of commuter rail and 665 track miles of subway in passenger service, plus hundreds of miles of local express, commuter, and intercity bus routes and an aerial tramway. The existing network of passenger hubs, transit stations and stops, bus terminals, subway transfer facilities, ferry landings, and bus stops. More than 1,300 miles of bicycle facilities ranging from shared use bike trails to on-road bike lanes, in addition to pedestrian sidewalks, trails, and paths. And then supporting infrastructure such as rail yards and highway maintenance facilities, highway rest areas, parking lots and garages, bus depots and transit storage yards, et cetera, et cetera. You can see the extensive nature of the infrastructure in our particular region. Okay, if we can go back now, Jessica, to the slide. So there are recommended strategies and actions in these areas, and what I'd like to do is just go right to the page to show you some of the details of that. So planning and research, there are a number of specific recommendations. Essentially having to do with inventorying both facilities and services, as well as potential funding sources and so forth, getting a better handle on both what resources are available and a better handle on a condition of the infrastructure. Under data collection, forecasting, and performance, there are a number of different specifics here in terms of data that can be collected and including relevant sources of big data and technological tools for data collection. That is an area that's changing. Data access is increasing, and the tools available to collect data for this type of a goal are improving. Planning process recommendations, you can see them here. Identifying priority multi-state, multi-agency system preservation projects is among them. Multimodal corridors that are priorities. And then finally, program recommendations. Regional guidance programs, transit access programs, and transit service enhancement programs, as well as freight access programs. Again, there's a lot of information in these recommendations, and we really don't have the time to go through each one individually, but you get a sense of what the recommendations are for this particular goal area. Finally, we go into the metrics for this goal, and you see some pavement metrics, bridge, and some transit metrics. And this is basically the condition of the facilities and the age of the rolling stock in many cases. All right, so again, giving you a flavor of this particular goal module. Take it away, Jessica.
Great, thank you, Jerry. So we're going to rank the reliable and easy travel recommended strategies and actions. And so I know Jerry's read a couple of the sub-recommendations in each of these categories, and we're just asking you now to let us know what your how your ranking of each of these recommended and strategy action categories lie. So I'll give it a couple of seconds to see how the rankings stand. The first ranking that has come in is in first place, planning and research initiatives. And data collection, forecasting, and performance assessment has been placed in second, now in first. And it seems like data collection, forecasting, and performance assessment has been placed in first, planning and research initiatives in second, program recommendations, specifically freight access programs, have been placed in third, transit access programs in fourth, and in fifth place, both planning process recommendations and transit service enhancement programs have been placed in fifth. And so now we'll move on to the next slide. And this is just a general comment wall slide where you can give us any comments you have on the reliable and easy travel module that we just went over. And I'll give that a couple of seconds. And I'll hand it back to Jerry.
All right, moving into the third area, the third vision goal, planning for changing demand. You can see, essentially the description here, the excerpt is given the forecasted growth in population, workers, and the amount of goods moving within and through the Nymtic planning area. This goal seeks to ensure the efficiency of the transportation system by identifying and funding to the extent possible feasible and cost-effective investments. So that's an excerpt of the goal description. Next slide, Jessica. Here are the 5 objectives that were defined by our members for this particular goal. Investing in system capacity to satisfy demand and relieve overcrowding. Expanding the reach of the system to underserved communities and emerging markets. Encouraging walking, biking, TOD, complete streets, parking and curb management, and other long-term sustainable land use strategies that support passenger and goods movement. Modernizing local freight networks to efficiently plan for growth, and then finally incorporating emerging and innovative transportation services and tools into efficient network design. And I believe there's an exercise following this. Yes, go for it, Jessica.
Great. So we're going to ask you to rank the objectives that Jerry just read out loud. And if you've come into the meeting a bit late, please feel free to visit polev.com/Nymtic to provide your responses to the questions on the screen. So we have here a truncated version of the planning for changing demand objectives. And I'll give it a couple seconds so that everybody places in their rankings. And first, we have both invest in system capacity to relieve overcrowding and expand reach to underserved communities and emerging markets. That is now moved to number 1. I'll give it a couple seconds. And we have expand reach to underserved communities and emerging markets staying at number 1, and invest in system capacity to relieve overcrowding in 2. And 3, we have modernizing local freight networks. Number 4 has been incorporate innovative transportation services and tools, and 5 is encouraging sustainable land use strategies. So I'll hand it over to Jerry now.
Okay, thank you, Jessica. So again, here's the scan of the sort of the guts of this particular goal module, the trends, the current risks and conditions, existing initiatives that were scanned as part of this goal module. And moving on, Jessica. Here's a highlight of some of the existing initiatives, transit improvements. This is just a highlight now, this isn't the whole thing, but continued expansion and implementation of bus priority measures in New York City and bus rapid transit in suburban corridors to increase transit service speeds and reliability. These are developments that have been happening over the last 5 to 10 years. Measures include busways, transit truck priority streets, and off-board fare payment. And another part of that is also enhancing transit fare collection and better integrating it also. So this is just a highlight. We have the recommended strategies and actions. Note on the program recommendations, there are, well, go ahead, Jessica. So there are a number of planning and research, including identification of core markets and emerging markets, activity centers, underserved communities. That's very important to bring everybody to agreement on what those might be, benchmarking techniques and so forth. Looking at the distribution of facilities. Under planning process recommendations, we have our coordinated development emphasis areas, which are identified where land use and transportation can be brought together more closely, using that as a targeting mechanism, and convening interagency work groups to identify multimodal corridors that are particularly important. And then finally, on the program recommendations, those fall under complete streets programs, under transit access programs, and then finally under shared mobility program. Again, just to give you a flavor and overview of some of the things that are being recommended here. Finally, the metrics. VMT is vehicle miles of travel. So VMT per capita is an important metric for overall efficiency in travel. Person hours of delay, public transportation system reliability, level of travel time reliability, travel time index, and truck travel time reliability. Those are some of the performance metrics under this particular goal. So, Jessica, let's do the exercises.
Great, thank you, Jerry. So we'll now ask you all to rank the planning for changing demand recommendation strategies and action categories. As Jerry mentioned, there's sub recommendations under each of these categories. And so we're just asking you to rank them primarily as a whole. So I'll give it a couple of seconds for the rankings to come in. And it seems like Complete Streets programs recommendations are in first place. Planning and research initiatives have been placed in second. Transit access programs have been placed in third, and shared mobility programs have been placed in fourth, and the planning process recommendations have been placed in fifth. Give it a couple more seconds just in case there are rankings that haven't come in yet. And now we're going to move on to just a general question for just a general opportunity for comments on this planning for changing demand module. And I'll give you a couple of seconds to respond. Seeing no comments, I will hand it back to Jerry.
Great, thanks, Jessica. And if you're entering comments and we switch to the next slide, that doesn't mean the comment will still get recorded. So keep going and make sure it gets entered. So we have two more goals. This is reducing environmental impact, which I see that unfortunately, Jessica, the format was sprung on the title. We'll have to fix that later. So really, we're talking about the fact that the transportation system can have significant effects on the environment. According to EPA, transportation activities accounted for 28% of total U.S. greenhouse gas emissions in 2018, was the largest single source of these emissions. That's all pre-pandemic, obviously, but it's likely to get probably in the same territory as we emerge from the pandemic. And then enhancing and preserving the transportation system can also affect local and regional air quality, natural habitats, and water resources. So all these are hooked in with this particular goal. Next slide. Here are the 6 objectives that were identified by our members for this particular goal. Encouraging alternatives to single occupant vehicle trips, encouraging lower emissions alternatives to trucking, modernizing fleets to higher standard and lower emissions vehicles, efficiently managing limited roadway capacity, promoting responsible environmental stewardship in transportation projects, and addressing unequal impacts of transportation emissions on communities. So guess what? The next item is ranking these. So Jessica?
That is correct. So Jerry just read all of the objectives for reducing environmental impact, those objectives. And so we just want to ask you to please rank them in the order of relative importance. So I'll give it a couple of seconds for the rankings to come in. And again, if you do not see the question immediately on your browser, I would suggest you refresh and the question should pop up right away. And if you've entered late into the meeting and would like to participate in the interactive poll, please visit pollev.com/Nymtic. And I see some rankings are coming in now. I'll give it a couple more seconds. And as Jerry mentioned, if you're still ranking when we go to the next slide, you're still able to provide your rankings in relative importance. And it seems like the ranking responses have finished coming in. At number 1, we have encouraged alternatives to single occupancy vehicle trips. In number 2, encouraging alternatives to trucking freight. Number 3, efficiently manage limited roadway capacity. In number 4, we have both modernizing fleets and promoting responsible environmental stewardship. And in number 6, we have addressing unequal impacts to transportation. And so I'll hand it back to Jerry.
And as with the others, these are the scanned items for trends for current conditions and for existing initiatives. Just want to point out on the trends, we're looking at criteria air pollutants under the Clean Air Act amendments of 1990, as opposed to greenhouse gases, which is not a criteria air pollutant. And then we were also looking at travel as defined through vehicle miles of travel. So we're looking for that relationship. You can see a lot of existing initiatives identified here, but the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act that was passed by the New York State Legislature and signed into law by the governor is obviously chief among the existing initiatives relating to environmental impact. And that is first on the list for that reason. Next slide. Some of the trends highlights, just to give you a flavor here. We looked at greenhouse gas trends in New York State, and the source of this was the New York State Greenhouse Gas Inventory through 2016 from the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. You can see some moderating, slightly moderating trends in terms of greenhouse gas totals and those amounts, those proportions that come from transportation. But the item on the right is very significant because it does underscore the targets in the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, which calls for economy-wide greenhouse gas emissions reductions from 1990 levels by 40%, 40% reduction by 2030, and no less than 85% by 2050. Next slide. And then, of course, you have to look at, in current conditions, vehicular travel. This is an interesting urbanized area comparison across the country because you can see that obviously New York City, the urbanized area is the largest in the country, 19 million people, and the daily VMT, the vehicle miles of travel per capita, is in fact relatively low relative to other urbanized areas. Very interesting. But then you look at the travel time index, which is an indication of if one is average travel, the higher you are. Above one means the more delay there is. So we're pretty high on that. So even though we have an efficient transportation system relative to other large areas, we still have significant delays in what people experience as they travel around our region. Next slide. This is one of the reasons when you look at the total transit ridership in the top 10 urbanized areas, you really see one of the reasons for the high efficiency in our region. We are far and away transport more people by transit than in any other of the major urbanized areas. And this really underscores that. And that would be all aspects of transit, not just the MTA services, but also the suburban systems and the surrounding rail systems also, which feed our area. Next slide. Here are the recommended strategies and actions in the areas. I just want to underscore and point out the program recommendations in community planning, commuting alternatives programs, public messaging and marketing, vehicular emissions programs, and innovative materials programs. But Jessica, if you could go to the detail, we will show you a little bit of what is underneath each of those categories, and then we will ask you to rank them. So under planning and research, integration of shared mobility and micro mobility into the transportation system is an important research undertaking that's highlighted there. Engaging in multimodal planning studies, also trying to integrate modes and bring the system together as a system. Under data collection, a lot of monitoring here of congested link level performance, truck traffic and commodity flows and so forth. And then under planning process, convening of relevant agencies and interests through various working groups and developing multi-agency approaches. And then finally, under program recommendations, here are some of the recommendations under each of those specific items like community planning and community alternatives and so forth. So again, this is to give you a flavor of what's being recommended here. So let's go on finally to the metrics. So we have air pollutant levels, criteria air pollutant levels under the Clean Air Act. We have greenhouse gas inventory levels. And then the metrics involving travel, vehicle miles of travel, vehicle hours of delay. So it's not just travel, it's vehicle travel specifically, because that's where the emissions obviously are being generated. And now we have the exercise. Jessica?
Great, thank you, Jerry. So as Jerry mentioned, there are a number of categories under the reducing environmental impact. And so we're asking you to rank those categories in order of relative importance. And I'll give it a couple of seconds for the rankings to come in. And so we have planning and research initiatives is number 1. Data collection, forecasting, and performance assessment is number 2. Program recommendations, specifically public messaging and marketing programs, is number 3. And so we'll give it a couple of seconds so people submit their rankings. And planning and research initiatives has stayed at number 1.
Well, almost.
Yeah, not for long. Program recommendations, particularly vehicular emissions programs, has shifted to number 1. So I'll move to the next question, but you're able to still be able to provide your ranking suggestions. And here we're just asking for any general comments you may have on the reducing environmental impact module. And so I'll give it a couple of seconds for those comments to come in. And so I'll hand it back to Jerry. for our final.
Yes, this is our final goal. Thank you for your patience in moving through this. You're giving us a lot of good information. After this, we'll just have the financial section of the plan to go through quickly. We were planning on trying to finish around between 1:30 and 1:45, and we should be able to hit that. So on resiliency, we're talking about enhancing the transportation system's resilience to stressors and disruptions. And those could be environmental, related to climate change. They could be human caused, such as cyber attacks and acts of terrorism. And of course, we know all too well now they could also be public health emergencies. The goal seeks to inform the ongoing recovery process from past and current stresses and disruptions through feasible, cost-effective strategies also. So that's, we've come off of several damaging events that have happened over the last decade or more, and 2 decades in some cases. And recovery from those things is, in some cases, still in progress. Next slide. These are the objectives identified by the members: protect and fortify the major assets, continue to invest in sea level rise and climate change risk analyses, improve regional coordination on emergency and long-term responses, and then finally enhance the transportation network's resiliency by increasing travel options and redundancies. So those are 4 objectives under resiliency. And I believe we're going to try to rank those. Go for it, Jessica.
Great. Thanks, Jerry. So we have the 4 resiliency objectives. If you could please rank them, I'll give everyone a couple of seconds. And so we have a couple of rankings coming in now. I'll give it a couple more seconds before I read off the results. In first place, we have protect and fortify transportation assets as number 1. Number 2, continued investment in climate change. Number 3, increase travel options and redundancies. And number 4, improve the regional coordination on emergency responses. So I will hand it back to Jerry.
All right, so here's the scan of trends, current conditions, and existing initiatives. One thing I would point out here is that we did undertake as a region, along with colleagues in Connecticut and New Jersey, and Federal Highway Administration who financed the effort, some very significant research following Superstorm Sandy and 2 preceding storms that happened. There was an 18-month period where actually our region was affected by 3 major storms, Sandy being the last. And so that's a big part of what we were reviewing among the trends and current conditions. The existing initiatives, a lot of these initiatives come out of the Sandy experience, but the last item on the list is also something that's now really coming out of, in many ways, the COVID-19 pandemic experience in terms of improved public health programs and what they mean to transportation. Next slide. We'll go through this. Actually, why don't we just go to the page, Jessica, and we'll take a look at. So under resiliency, planning and research, continuing to look at and research the effects of climate change is an important part of this. It's not easy to gather data on that, and there are a number of different sources. So that is a focus here. Contingency planning is also a focus here. Under data collection, monitoring vulnerable assets throughout the planning area and developing an annual report of regional coordination. Planning process, a lot of coordination recommendations here in terms of responses plans and responses to particular situations. Promoting modal redundancy where we can. Shared risk analysis, and continuing to put resources into risk analysis. And then finally, program recommendations. There's a broad range of resiliency projects that have been identified, and completing those projects would be important because they involve retrofits to bridges and other improvements to streets, traffic signals, yards, and facilities, and so forth. Again, giving you a flavor of some of the recommendations here, but not going through them in detail. Finally, the last item under this goal are the performance metrics. These have to do with identifying vulnerable facilities, which we've taken major steps towards, and then looking at the percent of those facilities that have been hardened and can respond to various different conditions. Okay, Jessica.
Great. And so now we're going to ask you to rank those strategies and action categories for the resiliency goal. And so we have here planning and research initiatives, data collection, forecasting and performance assessment, planning process recommendations, and program recommendations. And so I'll give everyone a couple of seconds to provide their rankings in relative importance. And we have some rankings coming in. I'll give it a couple more seconds. And for the resiliency goal, it seems as data collection, forecasting, and performance assessment has been ranked number 1. Planning and research initiatives is number 2. And both in 3rd place. Oh, there's been a shift. Planning and research has joined data collection, forecasting, and performance assessment is number 1. And number 4 is program recommendations. Number 3 has fallen to the planning process recommendations. And so now I'll go to the general comments. If you have any general comments for the resiliency module, please include them in either in the chat, where we'll also collect those comments, but this is also an opportunity for specific resiliency module comments. And seeing no comments come in, I'll hand it back to Jerry.
Okay, so we're in the home stretch, folks. Thanks for wading through those 5 goal modules. They're obviously the strategic core of the new plan. We do have to, under federal regulations, identify how we're going to pay for the plan that we've laid out. That is the next section, which we'll go through quickly. Jessica, next slide. So the federal regulations require that the financial plan include system level estimates of costs and revenues reasonably expected to be available, estimates of funds that will be available for the implementation of the plan, and any additional financing strategies for the implementation of the plan. Not a small exercise in a region like ours with the size of the infrastructure and the services that we're talking about. Next slide. So we identified cost and revenue categories for the federally supported transportation system. You have operations and maintenance, which is day-to-day. You have system preservation, which is longer term, and you have system enhancement. Those are the 3 main categories. Next slide. For operations and maintenance, we had to forecast out the cost of operating the system, including any enhancements to the system through the horizon year of the plan. The figure on the left, the pie chart, shows those costs by agency. As you can see, MTA is the lion's share of the cost in terms of operations and maintenance, and the total is over $900 billion in year of expenditure dollars. So these are, you'll see that over and over. These are required inflationary estimates because they're supposed to, we have to inflate the costs and the resources to the year that they'll be expended and or spent. So that's what we've done in all cases. You'll see that YOE throughout. On the right-hand side, you can see how the costs bear up to the forecast of revenues that would be available for operations and maintenance. And although they're not completely one-to-one, they're certainly in the long term showing that enough resources will be available to meet these costs. And of course, that's detailed in the plan. It's more than just a bar chart. Next slide. For system preservation and enhancement costs, you can see on the left-hand side, that particular figure shows system preservation costs by mode. These are costs to basically achieve and support a state of good repair and preserve the system going forward. That's about $750 billion. That's billion with a B. 88% of that is for the transit system, and then smaller slices for pavement and for bridges. So that's system preservation. On the right-hand side are system enhancement costs. These are major system enhancements that are itemized here, as you can see, and then the minor system enhancements are aggregated in the first line. The total cost of system enhancements, which would generally are, you're talking about adding capacity to the system, either transit or roadways, was identified at about $50 billion, bringing the total of these costs to roughly $800 billion through the horizon year of the plan. Next slide. And then we had to forecast what the reasonably expected funds are for plan implementation. You can see that here in this particular bar chart. We have identified sufficient funding to be reasonably expected, but notice here the breakdown between federal and state and local. It's very significant in terms of the fact that this is a highly leveraged plan. 20% of it is anticipated to be federal sources. State and local are combined to 80%. So we're taking very important federal resources and we're leveraging them to a high degree to be able to preserve and enhance the system into the future. Next slide. We have looked at additional financing strategies also, which are in all cases being used in that financial estimate. For various projects, public-private partnerships have been used, value capture, which is basically capturing the value of new development to improve transportation facilities. Debt financing is a method that's been used for many, many years. We have used discretionary federal funding as opposed to the formula funding. And finally, our region is exploring the use of cordon pricing also to maintain and enhance our system going forward. Next slide.
And so now we have a ranking of the additional financial strategies and actions. Well, they're proposed additional financing strategies and actions that Jerry mentioned in the prior slide. So we have public-private partnerships, venture capital, debt financing, discretionary federal funding, and cordon pricing. So I'll give it a couple of seconds.
Okay, Jessica, I just wanted to, it's value capture. That's not venture capital. So.
Oh, sorry, value capture.
Okay. That's two different things, so I just wanted to.
Yeah, thank you. So I'll give it a couple of seconds for the rankings to come in. And so we'll give it a few more seconds for more rankings to come in. And so the first place ranking is discretionary federal funding. Second is debt financing. Third is public-private partnerships. Fourth is cordon pricing. And fifth is value capture. And so I'll move into the next set of questions. We're asking for any comments on the cost forecast that we just presented and or on any of the system enhancement project modules. And I'll give it a couple of seconds for any general comments to come in on this module. And I'll move to the next slide and hand it over to Jerry, but remind everyone that if you have any general comments, you can also place it in the comment pod. And back to Jerry.
Thank you, Jessica. I believe that's the last interactive exercise we have for you all. I'm just going to cover a couple of additional topics. There isn't enough time to go through these in detail, but there's a lot of information here, and we would encourage you before July 27th, if you have any interest in any of these areas, to go into the web portal and look them over and submit any comments that way. Next slide. We have to cover a number of special topics and in key plan appendices. Many of these are because of federal regulations, and others are because they're just good planning. They include pedestrian bicycle element, a coordinated public transit human services transportation plan, a regional freight element, environmental justice and Title VI assessment. That would be Title VI under the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and then an environmental mitigation new consultation section. We're not going to show these at this point. Actually, no, why don't you go to the page so we can show where they are, Jessica? We're certainly not going to show what they contain because they're each WE documents. But if you go into the web portal, this is the page which has, it's in the complete plan section, and it has all of the chapters and then all of the appendices. So you can see the different appendices that are here. Some of them are backup technical information, and some of them are these standalone documents that we're just talking about. We would encourage you, if you're interested in any of these topics, to look in these specific appendices and provide any comments that you have before the 27th of July. Next slide. We also have a number of recommended projects, programs, and studies. So this is in addition to the strategies and actions that were recommended for each goal module. There are also a number of different projects, programs, and studies that are specifically recommended in the plan. Next slide. We can show you some of them. First of all, I just want to, before we go anywhere, Jessica, of the projects, programs, and studies, they fall into two broad categories: fiscally constrained, which basically are projects that fit within that financial forecast we just talked about of reasonably expected resources. And then we have more speculative vision projects, programs, and studies, which do not fit, but are, desires in the long-term future that our members want to keep in sight, so to speak. We also have these coordinated development emphasis areas, which are land use areas where transportation and land use planning should be coordinated, and growth is desired in those areas. And then we have major metropolitan transportation investments under the federal regulations. This is just additional detail that we have to provide on some of those major system enhancements that you saw to meet federal regulations. So Jessica, why don't we just show the programs, the projects, programs, and studies quickly so people can see what they look like. So here we have a map which identifies all of the listed items that can be mapped underneath, either in the constraint plan, division element, or region-wide. You can see that the project names are here and various other information. And Jessica, if you could hover over one of the corridors or dots there, and yes, just hover over one. So you can see that there's information as you hover about these individual items which are mapped. So you can, if you have the time and you're interested in a particular area in the region, you can go in and look in detail about what is recommended in the plan for that particular area. And again, this is in addition to the strategies and actions that are recommended under the goal modules, but they're related back to the goal modules in various ways. Okay, Jessica, back to the slides, if we could. Next slide. There is also a congestion management process status report that is not part of the plan, but is required to accompany the plan. I will just go through this pretty quickly now and just show you what's in it. But again, it is available for you to review and comment on if you'd like. So we meet the federal definition of a transportation management area, and therefore we have to systematically forecast traffic congestion and produce specific performance measurements to identify levels of congestion, as well as preparing a program to reduce that congestion. So our congestion management process fulfills these requirements. As part of that process, next slide, we have to produce, and we do produce along with each plan, a congestion management process status report. And it provides an overview of the congestion management process and its methodology, presents the results of the most recent CMP analysis and forecasts, and describes the strategies committed to in the plan to address the current and forecasted levels of traffic congestion. So the CMP status report does not contain any specific recommendations that aren't already in the plan. So it's not yet another level of planning. It's rather reporting on the status and then tying that into the items in the plan that are relevant to congestion management. Next slide. There are a number of performance metrics that are also identified as part of the CMP that we have to fulfill. You see a list of them here. We're not going to go through this in any kind of detail. Next slide. And we do various peer region comparisons. You've already seen the table on the left earlier in the exercise, and on the right that just shows the relationship of the percent of travel that's congested with the percent of the system that's congested, showing New York in the middle ground of all the major metropolitan urbanized areas in the country. So, I mean, we are an efficient region, but still, given the size, there's a tremendous demand on our systems, and growth in the future still remains a challenge for us. Next slide. We also have forecasted conditions for each of our constituent counties and boroughs in terms of vehicle miles of travel in the base year of 2019, as well as forecasts of what will likely be in 2050. And then on the right, daily vehicle hours of delay for each individual county and borough, as you can see. Next slide. And then there is also a specific analysis for each county and borough and forecasts related to that. So you have county level congestion forecasts, and then using current data, current traffic bottlenecks are identified through the metric of level of travel time reliability. So all this is in the individual county and borough analyses that are in the CMP status report. Next slide. Amongst the strategies and system enhancement investments that the CMP refers to, first of all, there is a toolbox of strategies identified in the CMP status report. That's a generic toolbox. It's sort of like, here are all the different things you can possibly use as tools to mitigate congestion. So that's part of the CMP status report. But then there's also reference to the relevant goals, objectives, strategies, and actions from moving forward, and along with the system enhancement investments programmed in moving forward. Taken together, that's the major component of our actions and recommendations that are related to mitigating congestion. Next slide.
And so now we're just going to ask for any general comments on the methodology of the CMP report. I'll give it a few seconds for anyone who is interested in providing a general comment on the methodology. Again, you can place your comments also in the chat message board. Seeing no comments, I'll go to the next question, which asks specifically about the performance metrics that Jerry went over in the CMP report. And I'll go back to Jerry for the schedule.
Right, so this is the end of this particular session in terms of the information that we're reviewing with you. It's been a ton of information. We certainly appreciate your attention over this last hour and 45 minutes. Just to let you know what's going to happen going forward, if we go to the next slide here. So the draft plan was released for formal public comment, as we said, on June 28th, and then it'll run through July 27th. In August, on August 19th, Nymtic's Program Finance and Administration Committee will hopefully take an action to recommend the final draft plan and CMP status report to the principals of Nymtic for adoption. And then on September 9th, those principals will meet as Nymtic to adopt the final draft plan and the CMP status report. And that'll be followed by formal transmittal to the federal oversight agencies. This is all geared to be in place in time for the start of the next federal fiscal year, which will be October 1st of 2021, which is federal fiscal year 2022. So we will then have our plan and CMP status report adopted in time for the start of the next fiscal year. At which point, the planning process grinds on and we get to work on implementing as best we can the recommendations in the plan, and B, actually, we're going to start thinking about the next plan cycle because we have another 4 years to develop the next version of the plan, which isn't as much time as you would think. So those will be our activities after this plan is adopted. So again, we want to thank you for your attention today. You gave us a lot of great information, and there's still opportunities to give us more. If you just listened in today to get a sense of the plan, and you want to use the links to the portal and so forth to as a mechanism for making comments later on, that's perfectly fine. And again, that's available through July 27th in 2021. So thank you for your time today, and have a good rest of the day. Thanks, everyone.